How's it going, guys? This is Don from Prana-Tech. In this video I'm going to show you how I took this workbench that I found on Craigslist and turned it into a really functional fabrication and welding table. I have always wanted one of the CertiFlat or Stronghand welding tables, but I've just never been able to justify spending the $500 to $2,000 for a welding table or bench. So I've made some of my own in the past out of just steel plate on the top, and I've been, mostly dissatisfied with those, and mainly because it's really hard to get them perfectly flat. So you always have, bowing issues in the center where the, plate sags a little bit. And the other thing that I've always been unhappy with is the top of the steel always gets splatter on it from MIG welding. And you're constantly, every time you weld on it, you're constantly, every time you want to use it, having to grind off the top of it. Well, it's not really flat anymore if you're constantly polishing off the top. You're dealing with, a diminishing clearance as it goes down. So for a long time I've been thinking about this, and I've been wanting to build one with an aluminum top. I've welded on top of aluminum plates before with steel and MIG welding, and the nice thing about aluminum is that the welding slag doesn't stick to the aluminum. Occasionally you'll get a really big ball of something that may slightly stick to it, but you just take another piece of steel and it just knocks right off, and it doesn't weld itself to, because obviously steel and aluminum don't weld together. So that is one of the other things that I've been thinking about, is that not having the splatter on top makes it a lot easier for cleanup. So, but I really like the idea of the perfectly flat, and I like the spacing of the holes across the top, so I can set up clamps and jigs for odd-shaped welding projects. And so I really been wanting one of these for a long time, so I looked around. I was going to build my own bench, but I happened to find this one on Craigslist for they were asking $125, and I got it for $100. Well, the steel alone to make a bench like this would cost me more than $100, especially with big heavy-duty adjustable casters with locking bases. So I looked at it and I was like, well, I could spend all the time to build the bench, or I could just buy this one. And I ended up getting it for $100, which saved me an enormous amount of time that I could concentrate on all the work of building the top perfectly flat. So stay with me and I'll show you how I turned this bench into a perfectly flat top aluminum welding bench. All right? Thanks. Alright, so when I took off the wooden top, you can see that all it had was these sheet metal ribs that were really thin metal holding the center support on the wooden top. There was two down here and two down here, and they were pretty flimsy, and I knew this wasn't going to be enough support to hold up my aluminum plate that I wanted to do for the top. So what I did was I basically took some 1-inch bar, put one on each end, and one in the middle, and then two in between to space it out. This way they're about a foot apart each one, and I figured my plate of aluminum is 5/16 of an inch thick, and that would minimize the sag and be able to keep this table flat. So the most time-consuming and the hardest part of this was getting all of the beams exactly flat. That way, I bought the piece of aluminum that I bought was 5/16 inch thick, and it's 60/61, so it's a really high-quality aluminum plate. But if everything isn't aligned, the plate's not going to be flat. So what I did was I welded in the two end plates, or the end beams, first, and I leveled everything out so it was level to the whole unit. made the two ends perfectly flat. I hand fit each one, and then what I did is I started fitting everything in between. So I did the two ends, and then I did the center, and basically I just took the 1-inch bar, cut a slot on each end, and I kept trimming it down until it got exactly down to perfectly flat. And I kept using my level to make sure that I had all of the beams exactly in place. So each one of these I had to just keep fitting so that they were level this way and this way, because this is the most important part, obviously, if you want a truly flat welding bench or welding top to weld on. When you're jigging things up and you want them to be precise, you have to be precise in your layout. So this took me quite a while. It took me about a day worth of work to hand fit each one of these so that they were perfectly level. But it was worth it, because once I got done and I got the aluminum plate screwed down to it, it was perfect. I can put my level crossways, angles, any place on my top, and it's nice and flat. So it was well worth the time and the effort. So I'm going to put the top on now and show you what that looks like. All right, guys, so I've got my plate mounted onto my bench. I've got all the beams leveled so the plate sits perfectly flat, and I took about 4 hours worth of drilling to hand drill the 176 holes so that I have my Stronghand top for my bench. So I bought some 5/8 stainless rod, and that's what I'm going to weld to the bottom of my clamps, so that I have my welding clamps for hold downs for fixturing on this bench. But I hand drilled with a 5/8 step drill, and the rod will slip into it, but it's still a little bit tight, which is actually really good. I wanted it tight because you want this thing to slip down in and bind so that you get a good tight clamp for when you're fixturing up parts to be welded. So what I did was I took a 5/8 of an inch reamer, precision machined reamer, and I cut the shank off so it would fit in my drill, because the plate's too big to fit in my milling machine, so I'm gonna have to do it all by hand. So that's what I'm doing now, is basically reaming all 176 holes out to exactly 5/8 of an inch. So that's where we're at. Alright, right here I'm just doing a quick finish ream, a precise ream of 5/8 of an inch to all the holes on the bench for my clamps. That way they fit nice and tight and don't wobble. Anyway, I didn't want to make you sit through all of the drilling of the holes, so this is just a quick little video of it. So this would be a great welding table all on its own, just like this. But then I had an idea. It would be nice when I look at some of the CertiFlat or some of the other welding tables, a lot of times they'll have holes down the side so that you can jig things up, you know, in 90 degrees. So the other thing I did was mount a plate on the end of my table. That way I could do a bunch of different options and many different types of layout for fabrication. So I'll mount that and I'll show you how that looks. So this one took quite a while to get perfectly 90 degrees. So what I did was I welded the top bracket to the frame, and basically I drilled and tapped it and I got it set up so it was perfectly 90 degrees, and then I welded that bracket to the table. I did the top two first and I had it all laid out, but if you've ever welded something and trying to make 4 brackets perpendicular this way as well as this way, it's almost impossible. So what I decided to do, instead of welding all 4 brackets on both sides, I welded the top 2, and I only have 1 point of contact right there. So at that point, I drilled and tapped this hole into the frame on both sides, and I basically made the hole larger so that I could move it in and out till I got it dialed right in and made it perfectly 90 degrees, because I wanted this to be able to clamp exactly perpendicular to this surface. That way it's basically you know, a perfect 90 degrees. So that took a little bit of time, but once I got it all jigged up and laid out and clamped, I welded it, and then I drilled and tapped it, and then fine-tuned it down till it was perfectly 90 degrees. And so you can see it makes a great welding bench. And I'm going to weld up some bar clamps, and I'll show you what that looks like. That way you can see how I'm going to use it. Alright, so here you can see I'm laying out for making my clamps for the table. Basically just welding on 5/8 stainless rod onto the end of the clamp rods, and also the tips that were cut off of the clamp rods for work stops. So you can see just how easy this cleans up with just a little bit of Scotch-Brite, and I'm back to a nice clean bench without all that grinding of slag and splatter. So here you can see the clamps I've made. One of the things that I showed earlier is when you make this type of clamp and you're welding on the bottom of it, you have to cut off the L that's on the end. And this is one of those things that you just don't want to throw away, because this is a great work stop. All I did is weld a piece of my 5/8 rod to this, and this now can be a work stop against clamping, you know, on the face of the table. So I always save these. They make great little work stops. You can see I made 2 short ones and 3 long ones. This will do just about everything I need. I have some other ideas for some different types of clamps I'm going to make, but this is pretty much will get me started. And I also want to show you one of the reasons why I wanted the plate on the end, and I'll show you with some stuff clamped up. So one of the things that's really nice about having an end plate or a fixture plate on the end of the bench is it gives you a lot more options as far as layout of your parts. And one of the cool things about it is it allows you to lay things out and weld on the ends of them. With this, you have infinite height adjustment, whereas most benches you're just welding on the flat and you're trying to weld on the end. It makes it a lot harder. If you have a plate on the end like this, you can adjust it whatever height is comfortable. That way you can do a lot finer welding, especially if you're doing TIG, things like that where you need some very precise layout. This gives you a lot more options. The other thing is that it gives you a chance to do compound layouts. If you have 2 pieces that need to be at compound angles, that's one of the things that you can lay out. If you have just a really strange setup, you know, with weird angles, this is one of those that has almost infinite adjustment for laying out your welding. That's the reason I wanted the end plate, is it would just give me a lot more options as far as my layout for fabrication. A lot of people put a vise on the end of their table. I'm probably going to do some version of a vise, but it'll probably be one that's removable that I can just bolt up through the holes from underneath. Because mainly most of the things I do, I'll be able to do just by doing end clamps like this. And it's a lot quicker than a vise, plus it's not in the way. When I'm done with this, everything's back to 90 degrees and flat, and I don't have anything, you know, that's going to obstruct my layout for the next project. That's the reason I prefer this over having a vise mounted all the time. Another great reason to save these pieces that you cut off at the end and weld up a fitting on the end is that it makes great storage for the end plate. Alright guys, so that's it for my build for my CertiFlat or Stronghand style welding bench. I hope you enjoyed it. It's an economical way to get yourself a fabrication bench or a welding bench that you can have set up for jig fixtures and things like that. Especially if you're doing a lot of really cool oddball things, round pipe to square, things like that, where you need a lot of layout capabilities. This is a setup that will really work for a lot of different situations. So I hope you enjoyed it. This one ended up costing me, I paid $100 for the bench off of Craigslist, and then I spent $112 on the aluminum for the 5/16 inch plate for the top, and the one on the end is a 1/2 inch plate. So while aluminum isn't cheap, it's definitely a worthwhile top for a welding bench. The reason I wanted it was so that the slag doesn't stick to the top. Plus there's many other benefits. You can make it a lot thicker and not be anywhere near as heavy. So anyway, I'm excited to use this and build some really cool projects on the top of it, and you'll get to see a lot more of it in my next videos. If you enjoyed this sort of video and these sort of things for fabrication, stay with me. Subscribe to my channel, hit the like button if you like this video and this sort of project, and hit the bell if you want to get notified for my next projects. And I'll see you on the next video. Thanks guys.